Okay, so hi everyone, and welcome to the second talk in the Castaway series. We're going to be having a talk by Dr. Chaitra Redkar from ICER today. So I'll just get straight into it. Pallav is posting the rules in the chat. You'll be able to see them presented right now, but I'll take them down once Dr. Redkar starts speaking. So today's is the second talk, as I said, after Beena Palikal's excellent first talk that we had about a week back. It's a great pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Chaitra Redkar, who's going to be talking about the history of anti-caste movements. She did her PhD from the University of Pune in 2013 and was an associate professor in the political science department at SNDT Women's University, Mumbai, before recently joining our institute as a faculty member in the HSS department, or Humanities and Social Sciences department. As mentioned in the abstract, to understand the contemporary caste system, one needs to know the history of anti-caste struggles. And these struggles interrogated the rationale of the caste or the Varna hierarchy and attempted to annihilate the caste system. And she's going to be covering that today, starting from the colonial era. One request I'd like to make to everybody that is particular to this talk is as follows. What we saw in the last talk was that in the discussion part, at the end of the talk, there was a lot of questions about reservation, almost to the exclusion of other topics. Now, this is natural because as college students, we end up seeing reservation first in our experience of caste-related struggles. And it's important not to go off topic because of it. So we are going to be having a separate talk about caste and academia where we would like very general questions about reservation. For today's talk, I would request the audience to please keep questions about reservations to the historical context of Dr. Ambedkar and others, the context which Dr. Redkar talks about, because otherwise it tends to balloon and push out all the other issues that also need to be discussed. We would actually encourage you to bring up questions about reservation in that historical context because it will lead to a deeper and broader understanding, which will be helpful for the later talk. Then, without further ado, I think we should hear from Dr. Redkar now. So, welcome, Dr. Redkar.
Thank you, Akash, and thanks to all the members of Literary Club for inviting me to share my thoughts on this topic. And this has been one of the area of deep concern to me. My engagement has been with political thought in India, and we find that beginning from the 19th century, almost all the thinkers of uh, the modern Indian period have reflected on this particular issue one way or the other. And this is something which you can't bypass, you can't ignore. And uh, one of the projects which uh, the the people working in the area of Indian political thought have been doing is attempting to reconstruct the entire Indian political thought in different paradigmatic frameworks. And one of the framework is that of the anti-caste discourse, because the way it has happened so far is that we have tried to understand and interpret the ideas that emerged in India, in Indian context, addressing the issues of this land and this people, at times in the philosophical and ideological frameworks that emerged in completely different context of Western European society and in the context of Western modernity. So this is a very contemporary kind of an attempt which is taking place in other parts of world as well, where the basic concepts, whether starting from the idea of politics itself, attempt has been made to understand these concepts and these ideas in the non-European kind of context, and there are a couple of very pressing issues in this. Caste, which is very crucial to Indian society, and the way Indian society has organized the various hierarchies that exist in India, the way politics is organized in this land. It addresses the issue of caste. The entire the framework of caste affects these processes, and that makes it necessary for us to understand the entire caste discourse. Now, when I say that I'm basically going to talk about the anti-caste movement in India, though in the title I haven't added the word in India, and I rather thought over it, and also I thought of adding in Maharashtra, or whether I should put the word, I should say it in Maharashtra, or whether I should say in India. I was thinking for some time, but then I kept it that way only, that the way it is appeared. The reason is, when we are talking about political thought in India, or political ideas in India, and we are talking in terms of political ideas in Maharashtra, we'll find that there are many areas which are overlapping, whichever aspect of Indian political life you may consider, whether it is the anti-caste discourse, whether it is the gender discourse, whether it is the religious discourse, and all sorts of ideological streams, we find their presence in India, whether it's Hindu nationalist kind of arguments. So they have their presence in India, and all these ideological streams we also find present in Maharashtra. And they, rather, whenever we are talking about India, we need to consider these regional aspects, and that is some kind of an interesting tension that exists. Because when we are talking about these thinkers as Indian thinkers, or when we are talking about movements in the Indian context, we cannot ignore the fact that the regional context did shape the way the movements were organized, the way the ideas were shaped, because there is a long regional tradition in all parts of India. Uh, all regions of India, I would say. And particularly in case of caste, when we discuss this issue, or when we discuss the nature of caste system, one very significant factor which we need to remember, that broadly, though we know that the Varna hierarchy is something which is an all India phenomena, and not only all India phenomena, but to a large extent even South Asian kind of an phenomena, wherever Hindu religion is practiced, this phenomena exists. And also, when we talk about caste system, it is also a South Asian kind of a phenomena. But having said this, we also need to remember that there are regional variations. The nature of caste system certainly has some regional specificities and regional dynamics as it exists. And even in post-independent period, when we talk about anti-caste struggles, or the entire issue of mobilization of castes, or the way the castes are classified, we need to remember that if one particular caste is considered as scheduled caste in one particular state of India, it is not necessary in the other state it will be scheduled caste. Or a caste which is considered as OBC caste in one particular state could be considered as a nomadic tribe in some other state. So what is very essential for us to remember, that when we are talking about the history of anti-caste movement, or when we are talking about the issue of caste system, what is very essential for us to remember is the fact that there are regional variations, and that also explains why at different point of time in modern history, we find the anti-caste struggles emerging in different parts of India. It is not necessary that across India, this entire awareness about the dynamics of caste, the way caste is exploitative, and the way it has shaped our socio-economic and political life, this awareness we don't necessarily find emerging at the same time across India. So with this background, I would start my presentation. What I've done, I think I should be able to share screen, right, Akash? This is just...
Yes, ma'am. If you click on present now, you should be able to share.
Yes, so I'm using that. And it is just as a background. Yes. Just a second. So what I've done basically is just a kind of a timeline I've kept only to contextualize this entire discussion. I hope you are able to see my screen now.
Yes, ma'am. It's very clearly visible.
Okay. So when we are talking about anti-caste movement, another sort of a background note I think is essential, that when we talk about movement, we normally refer to the kind of mobilization which takes place at the level at the socio-political, in a particular socio-political context. And we refer to particular kind of issues or agitations that these movements take up. But when we are talking about any movement, and particularly with reference to the anti-caste movement, what we need to focus upon is the way the ideas rather shaped these movements. So when I'm talking about movement, I'm basically talking about this kind of an intellectual movement, or the ideas which contributed in shaping the anti-caste struggles in India. So we are not talking specifically about various agitations that took place over a period of time, but what we are looking for is the ideas which contributed in shaping these struggles, or the ideas which rather made it necessary for people to mobilize across them and interrogate the caste system and question the entire caste hierarchy in different ways. So while discussing these ideas, I will be referring the forms that were accepted and that were adopted by various thinkers of modern period. What I'm going to do basically is I will be focusing upon the ideas of Phule, Shinde, and Ambedkar. Intermittently, there would be reference to Shahu, and certainly when we are talking about Mahatma Phule, there is a very significant role which is played by Savitribai Phule. But my focus will be basically on the works and writings and ideas of these three people from the modern period. And while I'm discussing this, I think I should be able to I should be able to explain why between Phule and Ambedkar I have also added the name of Maharshi Vitthal Ramji Shinde, who is not very known figure, particularly outside Maharashtra. So starting with Phule, what basically I've done in case of these three is the upper sort of frame uh, refers to the context of the nationalist politics or the political context as such, and the line below basically gives timeline of that particular personality. So this is just to contextualize in what political context basically they were operating. I will not talk much about this because this is in front of you and you can see this. I'll talk more about the ideas. Now, in case of Phule, what is the very significant role of his works and his ideas? In the next slide, I have mentioned his works, and most of his writings are in Marathi. Of course, his text Gulamgari is translated in English, and in recent times, attempts have also been made to translate his work, but mostly he has written in Marathi. Uh, um, the statement that he gave before Hunter Commission is again in English, but mostly his works they are written in Marathi. Now, what is Phule's project? That is something which we need to understand. We are familiar with his work. We know that he is somebody who opened veil in his house to the untouchables. He's the one who started schools for girls. He's the one who gave shelter to the widows who were giving birth to child out of wedlock. And he also started an orphanage, and Savitribai Phule contributed. She actually shared equal partnership in all his work. So we are familiar more or less with the work that he did. What was his project? What is it that he was basically doing with particular reference to the anti-caste struggles? With Phule, we find that he is somebody who tries very systematically to understand the phenomena of caste. Prior to Phule, we find very rarely such kind of attempts being made. Uh, like particularly the nationalist thinkers, even if they talk about caste, their understanding goes in this way, that because we had some such practices, we had the practice of untouchability, or because we had the practices like sati, or because we were not imparting education to women, that is the reason we basically have been colonized by a more superior kind of power. Again, we need to remember that this kind of approach is not seen in all the personalities in this period. But if at all they think about caste, then this is the way more or less they are approaching caste. Now, in case of Phule, we find that he is looking at caste as a caste system. And this is very significant. This is something which we find present in the writings of all these three personalities about whom we are discussing today, we are talking today. So a kind of sociological approach we find, that they are not looking at caste as some kind of a monogamous unit, or not just as an occupation, but they're aware that there exists a system of hierarchy. All our castes refer to particular kind of occupation, but it is not mere occupation. There is a system of hierarchy which divides these castes into different groups and establishes a kind of relationship between different castes. Now, Phule asks a very pertinent question, that what is the reason of this kind of a hierarchy? What resulted into this kind of a hierarchical system? And here we find uses this idea of Aryan invasion. And again, we need to remember that this entire issue of Aryan invasion is in later period is refuted, but the resources that existed in Fule's time did believe that in the theory of Aryan invasion. So he believes, he rather in his works, he basically comes up with this idea that the son of the soil kind of people, the local inhabitants of this land, they were enslaved by the Aryan invasion. Their culture was given a very subordinate kind of a status, and the Aryans, they established their rule, and Brahmins basically represent that Aryan culture and Aryan supremacy. And very interestingly, if you read Brahmana Se Kasab, or if you read Shetkaryacha Asud, you will find that he very interestingly decodes the entire Hindu mythology. And he interprets this Hindu mythology to establish his argument that how Aryans invaded this particular land and how the people of this land were enslaved. And he goes further, and he basically uh, presents this hierarchical system in a very interesting kind of division which he identifies in this society. And he tells us about the nexus between the Shedji and Bhatji, that is the class of the capitalists and the class of Brahmins. And he expects alliance against this hierarchical system. uh, mm, Alliance he visualizes between Shudra, Ati Shudra, and Striya. Now, here what we need to remember is the entire Varna hierarchy. Now, as per the Varna hierarchy, there are 4 Varnas: Brahman, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudras. These are placed in a hierarchical order, and the scheduled castes in our constitutional terminology, whom we consider as scheduled castes, were considered as untouchables, and they were not part of the Varna hierarchy. Now, Phule refers to them as Ati Shudras. No, he believes that alliance between the Ati Shudras and the Shudras is necessary and is possible. And he also includes women in this alliance. And he believes that with this kind of an alliance, this entire system of hierarchy, the caste-based hierarchy, could be challenged. And for challenging this kind of an hierarchy, he certainly talks of efforts at various levels. One very significant is certainly that of education, and education would rather help people to come out of the myths of Brahminical supremacy which the scriptures have created, that the Brahmin has to be worshipped. And in Shetkaryacha Asud, he basically talks about how a Brahmin rather rather maintains his hierarchy, his hegemony by misleading the poor farmer who's uneducated, by telling him superstitious things about life and death, about the rituals that need to be performed. And with this kind of reference to the scriptures which are not accessible to these castes because they are kept away from education, the Brahmins rather maintain their superior status. And that makes him necessary to challenge Brahminical Hindu religion. And there we find that he comes up with a new system of ethics, a new religion which he talks about, and that is in 1973, sorry, in 1873, he establishes this Satyashodhak Samaj, and where he comes up with a new ethics of the Satyashodhak Dharma. His tract of named as Satyashodhak, Sarvajanik Satyashodhak, Sarvajanik Satya Dharma Pustika. It was published posthumously, where he basically talks about this new ethics which he wants people to practice in order to come out of the hierarchical system of hierarchical and very oppressive system which the Brahminical Hinduism has preached. And a very interesting idea which he comes up about the in his Satyashodhak Dharma is the idea of Nirmik as God. So he tells us that there is some kind of energy or some kind of a power which might have created this world, but after creation that power doesn't really interfere in our day-to-day life. So the onus of leading our life lies on our own shoulders, and it is we are responsible for our own life. Now, what is the significance of this idea of Nirmik is that he basically rejects the entire otherworldly approach, and in order to secure a place in heaven, or just because you want escape from the cycle of rebirth, you are not required to pay some money to Brahmin, or you are not required to perform some rituals to worship the god. And that is how, but you can still live a very ethical life. So to provide this worldly ethos to religion, he comes up with this idea of Satya Dharma. And in Satya Dharma Pustika, he also comes up with very interesting alternate rituals. For instance, for wedding, now we know that in the Hindu wedding system, there is this idea of Kanyadan, whether the father offers the daughter to the groom. He completely rejects that idea, and here he comes up with some kind of a pledge which the bride and the groom are supposed to take, and it's not the father who's offering his girl to some man, but it is the contract between the two adult human beings. So there are very interesting kind of alternate rituals which he comes up with in the practice of Satya Dharma, Sarvajanik Satya Dharma. I particularly found very interesting was the ritual for Vastu Pujan, or like a house warming celebrations which we do. He writes over there that rather than inviting people and paying some Brahmin to perform puja for your new house, you rather invite the people who build your house, and you gift them or you feed them. But rather than paying some dakshina to a Brahmin, you should engage those people who actually contributed in building your house. So such alternate vidhis, alternate rituals he comes up with. For our sociological kind of analysis, the significance of Fule's ideas lies in his entire attempt to develop counterculture. And his entire focus is, of course, is that on educating people and bringing them out of the hegemonic ideas for which he emphasizes education. But interesting part of it is that he finds it necessary that education, in addition to education, what is necessary to come up with counterculture, because culture ultimately shapes our attitude, our orientations to life. So it is not sufficient that only formal education is to be imparted, but what is essential is to rather secularize the entire cultural context, and to sort of infuse very secular ethos, this worldly ethos in our cultural practices. That is a very important contribution of Phule.